Hey guys, Ricky Widmer here from Most Valuable Podcast. You're about to listen to a little bit of our primetime podcast that we recorded this week. Make sure to go to Blog Talk Radio /Most Valuable Podcast for our full-length podcast that you can go ahead and download. I hope you enjoy it. I know me and Brandon did recording it. But Brandon, we got to move on into our next topic, and we're kind of moving right along into kind of a pseudo-series, a pseudo-off-season series for the Primetime Podcast. Starting about 2 weeks ago, we touched the NFL Draft for 2018 twice with Rosen and Allen. You guys seem to love it, so Brandon and I thought, hey, why not talk about more of these prospects that are going to be coming up into this year. Last week, we looked at the running backs and Saquon Barkley, and if he could be the best running back in college football this upcoming year. This week, we're going back to the quarterback position a little bit, the position that gets all the fame and all the glory in any football team, pro or college. And the reason why, or the thought that I had that I wanted to bring up Luke Falk today was we got a comment on our Josh Allen video from Hugh Cunning, and he said, just out of curiosity, where do we have Luke Falk ranked among our next year quarterbacks? And I kind of answered it in last week's video or a different video, but right now it's you got Falk, you got Baker Mayfield, you got Mason Rudolph. Throw a dart at a board, and that's my number 5 quarterback coming in to this year. They're all neck and neck for that 5th spot. But Brandon, I want to ask you to start it off. Is there any way this year in college football, Luke Falk for the Washington State Cougars, got to throw that out there because A, they're a Pac-12 team, and B, they're a lower-end Pac-12 team. Could he be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL draft after this season?
Well, Ricky, you know what my answer to that is going to be.
That's why I had to throw the Pac-12 out there.
I won't see him. I won't be watching. I'll be asleep. No, I'm kidding. But I you know what? If you looked at his numbers, if you looked solely on his numbers, and you saw that in 2015 he had over 4,500 yards, 38 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. 2016 he had just under 4,500 yards, 38 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. You'd go, yeah, he'll be the number 1 guy. But then you have to remember that Mason Rudolph is around, Baker Mayfield is around. Guys like that
the entire
are around.
Top 4 that we've talked about, and
Sam
Allen,
Darnold,
Rosen,
McSorley, all these guys are around. And these guys play in some competition that may be a little higher than what Washington State plays. Just a little bit higher. They are obviously a Power 5 and everything like that. But Luke Falk has some tools to be successful. He certainly has some tools to be successful. But as you and I talked right before we came on to do this podcast, was that you said you watched his tape today. I've looked and read so many articles on this guy. It's the fact that he can make some throws, but he doesn't have the arm accuracy, the arm strength of a Mason Rudolph, of what was it, Deshaun Watson, of a
Patrick Mahomes,
Baker Mayfield, guys like that who, Deshaun Watson, obviously he went earlier, I think, than expected in the draft, yes?
Deshaun Watson was of the quarterbacks, he was the second one taken. So Mahomes went 10th, and then it was right after him, or 2 after him, was Deshaun Watson.
And I guess you look at that and you see, he had very good arm strength. And, he's number 2 there at quarterback. I don't know if how much does that hurt Luke Falk? The fact that sometimes he's got some lollipops up there that makes it very easy for defenders to come in and get an interception or bat it down, where that's also not only is that going to, hurt in that sense, but that kind of really hurts your accuracy as well. If you can't get enough on the ball, you can't be accurate. But let me at the same time be able to say that he does get good touch on the balls that he throws.
Well, and that's the thing I noticed. Like, his release is, because it's so quick, and it looks like maybe it's a little bit higher. Maybe it's because he's taller than I am, but it looks like his release, he kind of makes up for the arm strength issue, and I'm going to call it an issue because as I was watching it, the first couple throws that I saw, the first thought that popped into my head was, that ball looks like it don't have no zip. It doesn't have any zip at all. It's just like you throw the ball, and I could be looking at a stopwatch like, has it got there yet? Has the ball got to the receiver yet? And when you don't have that arm strength, it hurts the accuracy, where I saw a little bit of inconsistencies, where there was one tape I watched with, like I told you before we started recording, where it had a lot of just out routes to the end zone, the post out route corner of the end zone. I'm going to loft it up to you because I'm looking at that and going, okay, there's a lot of these in here. I'm assuming this is his bread and butter. I also saw a lot of red zone clips in that one film because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, he must be really good in the red zone. But why, if I'm trying to showcase a highlight, not a low light, a highlight film, I'm going to put in, well, that's the ones where they're not the good plays.
Yeah,
that's
I know.
The low light films.
Clearly.
You don't want any low lights in your highlights. You can't get them confused with each other. But if I'm coming up with a highlight film, I'm putting in the ones that I want you to see. So I'm sitting there going, okay, so because of the arm strength issue, and I'm calling it an issue again, the arm strength issue, of course I'm going to show a lot of red zone plays because you don't have to throw the ball that long. That's 20 yards at least. You got to throw the ball. Maybe a little further, maybe about 20, 25, 26 if you're at the 20. But if he can, to me, if he can kind of make up for that a little bit, hit the weight room a little bit, get a little bit more zip on that ball, then he can make up for it. Because there were some passes where it was like, okay, that was underthrown. Okay, that one was overthrown. You're looking at you're looking at a Goldilocks situation when I was watching his throws. Some were just right, some were too much because he's overcompensating for not having that arm strength, and then some were just underthrown because he's just not thinking about it and just throwing it, and it becomes a little underthrown. If he can learn to fix that and make the accuracy become a little bit more consistent, then he can jump up into my top 5. But right now, the main thing that is keeping him in my top 5 is solely the touch and solely the release, and also his presence as well in the pocket. Because when I'm looking for an NFL quarterback, I want someone who's not going to get, who is not going to get rattled in the pocket, especially when pressure is presented to him. And I want a guy that can make reads out on the field, and I feel fairly confident in Falk in those two aspects. So that's the two that are keeping him in my top 5, but it's really that arm strength, and then along with his decision-making, that is why he might be out of my top 5.
I think that the thing for me, and one of the things that I want to get back to is just kind of the fact that, you know, this could then lead to interceptions, and some people would be saying, Brandon, in 25 games though that he played, he only threw 26 interceptions. Well,
but think about NFL corners.
We aren't talking college anymore. We're talking guys in the NFL who will feast on that.
There were so many throws where I'm like, NFL corner would have jumped that route. NFL corner would have jumped that route.
But take even a look at Carson Wentz. His first half of the season, boom. I mean, guys hadn't seen him. They weren't sure what he was going to do.
Then they got
second
that
half of the season, it was like he was having 3 interceptions. It's 3 interception games like it was nobody's business. And so I think that's that's just an interesting point. If he can just get a little bit more oomph on his throws, then I think that we can be really talking about a guy who can be really special, because he can certainly find his guys. He can certainly make the reads. I think that's just an interesting point to bring up. And then another thing, too, he stands at 6'4", 216. He's a small guy for a quarterback at 6'4". So if he could bulk up a little bit, too.
He's not Russell Wilson.
But can you, as a quarterback, then withstand those hits for 16 games.
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't had any injury problems in the past that I've known of.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that NFL, it's a whole new ball game, and you want a guy who can be ready to go and immune to injury for 16 games. That's the ideal situation. Another thing, though, too, with his decision making, he's got 1 interception per 67 pass attempts. That's where he's at in college. So the guy is not far off. He's not far off from being, I think, a really, really good quarterback. So I think that's something that is something to watch.
And the one thing I'll say, and this is for the quarterbacks in the NFL this year, that 6'4" doesn't really, I look at that and I go, okay, that doesn't kind of scare me, because obviously he's not as big as a Brock Osweiler, who is 6'8", but he's not a Russell Wilson or a Drew Brees who are 6 foot 5'11". The average height for a quarterback out of all the starters this year is actually around 6'4". So I look at that and go, perfect, he's fine. Really, as long as you can see over the defensive line, I'm fine there. Plus, with his presence and his being able to read, the thing I think most with Falk is going to be, where does he go? And depending how he does this season is going to play into that. Because if he has good games like last year when they beat UCLA, they hold them off to win 27-21. I mean, I know in that game he didn't play well, but if he comes back, and that one could be totally different because Rosen could be on the other side. He was out for that one. If Rosen's in that game, he goes up against Rosen as a better game, beats Rosen, that'll up his hype. Another thing that'll up his hype is if he's able to go into Washington and beat them, because I want to say that game against Washington would be in Washington this time, not Washington State. Jake Browning, he's going to be a star quarterback this year, and they beat Washington State 45-17 last year in their route to the Pac-12 title and the college football playoff. I think he's a quarterback that could get hyped up when we get to the NFL draft, and if he does, there's a kind of a maybe option where I think this is going to be the year where, and of course things may change throughout the season, but right now as I sit here on May 24th as we record this podcast, Brandon, I have the thought in my head that this could be one of the years where we see the most or close to the most quarterbacks taken in the first round or even in the first 2 rounds. There's going to be a ton of them that go just because of the type of talent that we could have coming out for this year's NFL draft. And I think that if he gets overhyped and goes to a team that needs him to start either day one, or if it's a team like Cleveland, I'm going to say this year, like if he's a Deshaun Kaiser this year, Kaiser goes to the Browns, yeah, you're assuming Cody Kessler will get that job, but there's a chance that Kaiser could be thrown in to the Flames. If Falk is in that situation, I think he fails. But if he goes to a situation like Mahomes is going into, where there's no way he's going to start this year unless an injury happens to Alex Smith, it's that situation where I think Falk can thrive, because he needs to have a solid year this year, then get drafted, hope that a team with a good situation picks him up so that he could be, and I'm not saying he's going to project this way, I'm just saying the situation coming out is going to be similar. I'm going to say kind of like an Aaron Rodgers, where you get drafted by a team and you can just sit there and develop for a year, 2 years before you're expected to start in the NFL.
So I've got a question for you, Ricky. Okay. And that is, are you surprised that he came back this year?
I'm not surprised. And the reason why I'm not is because I look at Falk and I think if he would have came out this year, he would not have been put into a positive situation, because you add another quarterback into the situation of this year. We were already saying that, like, my big thought was that, in the second round, we're going to have a run of quarterbacks. Well, if he's there, do the Bears in the early second, do they trade that second? Do they take that pick and take a Falk? We don't know if there's a team like a Chargers or a Browns that go ahead and take him. And I think that if he came out this year, I would assume he'd be in a poorer situation, because there wasn't going to be a team like the Chiefs. The only way the Chiefs took a quarterback was because they really liked Mahomes and thought, we got to trade up to get him. All of the other teams that had good quarterback situations weren't going to look at Falk from where he would be. I would put him as a second, maybe third if he came out this year. Maybe even a first. Maybe someone would have reached on him and tried to trade up in. But I'm glad that he came back. And the reason is because he doesn't have that arm strength. I think he can go and develop more this year in college, where I feel like it's easier to, and I don't feel this way, it is this way, I feel like it's easier to screw up in college and bounce back from it than it is to screw up in the NFL. Because if you're screwing up in the NFL, then we get this kind of thought of like, there's no hope for you. There is no hope for you. You're playing against the best talent in the world and you're not cutting it. So you know what? There's no hope. In college, you sit there and go, well, hey, I can draft this guy and maybe I can bring out his potential. And there's going to be a team that falls in love with him. Luke Falk is that prospect where I feel like there's going to be one management, one coach that falls in love with him because of he's got the average height, he's got the touch and the release, and he can also has that. The big one to me is that pocket presence. That's something you can't teach. Getting blitzes thrown at you and simply just stepping to the right or stepping to the left, or the way I'm sensing the blitz, I'm going to roll out and throw on the run. You can't teach that. That's something to me you either have or you don't have. It's kind of like being a performer. If you're going to go up on stage and get nervous, then guess what, honey? Singing ain't for you. If you're going to go out there and you're calm, cool, collect on that stage, no matter how many eyes are pointing at you, then you're okay. And I think he's good in that department. To me, the big thing he has to overcome is that arm strength. And is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. Not every quarterback in the NFL is, I'm going to throw out a name because he's the first strong arm quarterback that pops into my head. Not everyone's a Jay Cutler, where you go into Madden and you look him up and the personality trait says, boom, strong arm quarterback. Not everyone is like that. So he can't overcome that. I just think he needs to work this year, show some flashes this year, and then it also depends on who falls in love with him and if he gets the right situation. Because if he goes to a team like maybe a Pittsburgh, maybe a Green Bay, and I'm just throwing out teams that have established quarterbacks, maybe even a Chargers, because Phillip Rivers is at the end of it. I would say Steelers and Chargers are top two I'm thinking about, just because their quarterback situation for the future is a big old question mark. I mean, Big Ben has said he's going to take it year by year at this point in his career. If he lands in a right situation where he can sit for a few years, like 2, 3, and then come in and start, then he will be, to me, I can see him being a solid starter in the NFL.
I think that, again, like I said, I think that there's a couple of guys that are in front of him, but I don't see why Luke Falk wouldn't be able to get there.
Right now, if he has a great 2017, and I'm talking like the best 2017 season he could possibly have, the best he can be in my mind coming into the draft is 5th on my quarterback rankings and end of the first round, just because I don't think he's going to surpass I'm going to say Darnold, Allen, and Jackson. Rosen, I'll say he might be able to surpass, but I think that only if that happens, then a Baker Mayfield or a Rudolph might jump up ahead of me to take that spot. I'm not quite sure if Luke Falk will be my fourth best quarterback heading into the NFL draft. But before I kick it off to them to let them tell us what they think, do you have any final thoughts on Luke Falk when it comes to him and his top 5 quarterbackness, I'll say, coming into the draft?
I'm set. I'm good.
Well, and this is where we turn it on to you guys. Let us know down below in the comment section. What do you guys think? Could Luke Falk be a top 5 quarterback? What do you like about him coming into the season? What do you don't like about him coming into the season? And what is one thing he's going to have to do this year if he wants to be a top 5 quarterback in the 2018 NFL Draft? Well, thank you guys for checking out this video from the Primetime Podcast. If you want to check out more, click right over here. The video's right over here. Check it out. Check it out. Check it out.